Jimmy, let me tell you an epiphany
I love a good epiphany, Jake.
that I had last night.
All right.
Last night, it was wonderful, by the way. The treadmill that I use has this program where you can run through different cities of the world. So last night I did a run through Auckland, New Zealand. Like I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing snow and snowplows, but I'm looking straight ahead of me on the tread, and I'm always curious, by the way, with those things, the video that you are seeing.
Yeah.
Is it a drone that is recording that, or is it a person walking with like a contraption that is recording it?
I've been curious about
because
that too.
occasionally you will see people that clearly, whatever it is that's passing, occasionally people will like look up and wave or jump out in front. So they're clearly, whatever it is, they can see it, right?
Yeah, I've tried to like bike through Brooklyn, or you can like do it on some of those different apps where you can go through the streets of London or whatever the case may be.
So I ran the streets of Auckland, New Zealand, and then I sat down and I'm watching the Pacer game, right?
In New Zealand or back home?
I watched, although the Australians are going to be here Wednesday for the game, tomorrow for the game. So, but no, I watched the game at home, not in Auckland.
Okay.
I was now back to life, back to reality. And as I'm watching the game, I'm thinking about, I'm watching the Pacer game, and I'm seeing on the floor, and I'm thinking about the ebb and flow of an 82-game NBA season, right? And how when the Pacers got off to a slow start, it would have been an easy thing to make a trade or make a move or I mean, not make a trade, but you know what I mean? Like to reshuffle the lineup.
Hit a panic button.
Hit a panic button. But sometimes you have to look at things and not get swept up and caught up in the moment, and rather just like stay almost loyal and rational and take emotion out of it, if you will. And this sounds odd because what I'm going to talk about is something that I guess you could pin as loyalty and stability, but I think there's a lot of emotion that goes into it. When we talked yesterday about Jim Irsay's decision to stay with Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, and the controversial or the polarization, not even polarization really in this town of that, because I think most people were opposed to, certainly from the Ballard standpoint. But I really do believe that Jim Irsay made that decision, maybe not 100%, but partially motivated by emotion and sentimentality. Okay?
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking about it and looking back. And we went over, and I don't have to rehash for everybody everything that I talked about yesterday in terms of Irsay and wanting to get a chance to still have influence of proving that he can build a roster and build a team based on the one itch that was created for him when he was a general manager. And I can appreciate and applaud Jim Irsay for his, quite frankly, loyalty, right? And I thought, okay, he probably maybe, in fact, in time will tell that he's staying with Chris Ballard too long. Some might say he already has.
Yeah, right here.
But with another year of, maybe there's a loyalty there, right? There's a sentimentality. There's an emotion that comes into it. And then you think about with, bringing back Jeff Saturday, that was probably like a sentimentality, an emotion of, getting the old band back together and hearkening back to the glory days and the glory era of the Peyton Manning-led Indianapolis Colts. And then it dawned on me. Forever we began to feel like and think in this town that the Colts were this quality, top-to-bottom winning organization. That it was an organization that was of the utmost quality and the utmost approach, and winning was the standard. And chasing the Lombardi or multiple Lombardis was the standard. And professionalism was the standard. And duty and work ethic and earning your paycheck was the standard. Peyton Manning gets his paycheck. What are you going to do with your first paycheck, Peyton? I'm going to earn it. And professionalism of, sure, when Peyton Manning was here in the locker room, Marvin Harrison had his rack of tasty cakes in front of his locker, and Edgerrin James had a flat screen television. He had 2 lockers, and in one of them, a flat screen TV that was hooked up to PlayStation or Xbox or one of those, and guys would be playing it. And, there were Nerf hoops in the locker room. But when Peyton Manning would round the corner every Wednesday to do his weekly avail at his locker, everything kind of stopped for a split second. Just to make sure that, like, Manning, because he had an aura about him, and Peyton Manning has talked about since then that he felt like leadership was earned. It was not just appointed. That he felt like he had to be the first guy in every single day, to let people know he was serious, and to be the last guy out of there, and staying late, having Jeff Saturday snap him soaking wet footballs before the Super Bowl, and preparation. All of that went into leadership. And so when you're winning 10 games to start the season for so many straight years, and 12 games and 14 games, and you're talking about whether or not you're going to be able to go 16-0, and it's an automatic fait accompli that you're going to see the Patriots again deep into the playoffs, and their Super Bowl talk year in and year out, and you go and you win a Super Bowl, and you go to another one, and the ball drops this way or that way, and you get a second one possibly. All of those things, we began to feel like that was the standard that the Indianapolis Colts had elevated themselves towards. And then it dawned on me, my epiphany. This franchise right now, between the head coach, the general manager, the quarterback, the star running back, the guard, the linebacker who's going to the Pro Bowl, the safety, the wide receiver that just played through an injured back, the entire tight end room, everybody I just mentioned has never known that standard. They've never known it here. Most of them, this is the only place they've ever been. Sure, Shane Steichen was on a staff that won, but he wasn't the head coach. He wasn't the guy leading. Nobody on this roster knows what it's like to be a leader, to lead a professionalism and an expectation and raise that bar. And thus, the epiphany hit me that perhaps we were all snowed and fooled into thinking that the Indianapolis Colts were the brand of professionalism, when in reality, it was Peyton Manning. And the irony of all of that is the one time that Jim Irsay in the last 15 years undoubtedly made a decision based on what was best for football and not on sentimentality and not on emotion. And one could argue the one decision he made more than any other that took the biggest set to fall back on, this is the best football move. And at the time, it was the best football move. I understand that. I said at the time, he did the right thing. And retroactively, knowing what was known in that vacuum, he did the right thing. But the reality is, the one at its core football decision that the Indianapolis Colts have made, where they took all sentimentality and all tea leaves and tarot cards out of the equation, was to cut Peyton Manning. That's it. Ever since then, every decision that's been made has been made based off of sentimentality and emotion and late meetings and tears falling and attached at the hip and all of those things. Every single one of them.
Do you think it's regret fueled? Because I don't think it was the wrong decision even now. Like, what played out with Manning's career, we could debate this for 2 shows. I don't think he wins another Lombardi without the departure to Denver, with how great that defense was and the weapons around.
I would agree.
But that aside, him now clinging to things from a sentiment standpoint.
Being Jim Irsay.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Jim Irsay clinging to things from a sentiment standpoint. Do you think that's an overcorrection in his mind because he regrets that move?
No, I think, and again, and I understand this. Okay? I understand this. I'm not condemning him for it. One thing that happens on this show, okay, it has happened numerous times. I think a lot of people find it to be an endearing quality of this show. One thing that happens on this show is that there is an age difference between the two of us. And so things that seem very recent to me seem very long ago to you.
Sure.
Like I will say, well, gosh, Jimmy, don't you remember? I mean, what was it, like 5 years ago when Paul George had that dunk against the Heat? And you're like, no, dude, that was like 14 years ago or whatever it may be, right? because as you get older, objects in the mirror become, you think they're closer than they appear, but they're further than they appear, right? So I think in the case of Jim Irsay, he thinks that the world of football, the National Football League, the other owners, the other coaches, the other players, the fans, the media, I think he thinks that people still think of the Indianapolis Colts in that stratosphere by which they were seen from 2002 to 2018. We'll go with the first couple years of luck as well. And what he doesn't grasp is that in reality, from a national standpoint, they're the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah.
They're a team that had a great run that now is mired in mediocrity and stuck right in the middle of that vat of suck. And the reality of coming to the acceptance that you are further away than you think is a tough reality to swallow. And the irony is, the last time that Jim Irsay was able to look at it from a realistic standpoint and say, no, tough decisions need to be made and I'm going to have to make it, was when he said the Indianapolis Colts have released Peyton Manning. And since then, they've been chasing that ghost. I told you every year, this time a month ago, I went to go see A Christmas Carol at IRT. And in A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by the ghost of Christmas past, right? And I feel like each year when the playoffs roll around and the Indianapolis Colts find out that their dance card is full and they're on the outside looking in, it's as though the ghost of transactions past are once again haunting them.
I don't disagree with you on that. I find it funny if that is partially the case, because the leader figure that you're talking about in Peyton Manning has no direct ties to Chris Ballard. Like, Ballard wasn't here for that. It's not like Ballard was a holdover from their championship years or their run to the Super Bowl where they fall to the Saints. He wasn't here. He was still, an up-and-coming front office guy working around the league. I can't remember if he was in Kansas City at the time, but he winds up going there, and then they poach him from the Chiefs. But he has no tie to that previous line of lineage. But it makes sense that perhaps JMV had said it during the crosstalk yesterday, and you had mentioned it as well. You guys just both phrased it differently. They're looking in the mirror and thinking fondly of the past. They need to be looking at a window to reality into the future and realize that league-wide, that's not the perception anymore. And many point to, take Ballard away from it. The gamble that you're making right now on Anthony Richardson is the lowest completion percentage since Tim Tebow over a decade ago for a quarterback of his age range. And you're hoping that's going to change. And you haven't overhauled the pieces around him at this stage to think it's going to change. You fire your defensive coordinator last night, a move all of us saw coming. I think each one of us at one point in time over the last 2 months said, watch what happens. They're going to keep them. They're going to fire Gus Bradley. And they're going to say that was the issue. But in terms of fixing Richardson, and maybe there's more changes to come, but Jim Bob Cooter's going to retain his position. Shane Steichen's not going anywhere. I don't know how much changes they'll do within the quarterback coaching room. The only thing that's left for them to help him is maybe they go finally get the tight end to pair with him, or maybe they help them in the offseason. But outside of that, you're not going to find a lot of tangible ways to be hopeful on this lottery ticket.
Here's what's interesting to me. And by the way, good afternoon to you. That's the voice of Jimmy Cook. My name is Jake Query. It is Query & Company here on 93.5, 107.5, The Fan. You might hear the voice of Eddie Garrison as well, who is...
I'm here.
Who is here,
I'm
right?
listening. You're doing a great job, Jake and Jimmy.
Thanks, Eddie. You too.
I can tell. I can tell you're paying the most keen of attention, Eddie.
By the way, I don't mean to fully derail, but I'm going to do it anyway. Age range of the Pacers sweatshirt you have on today, because I'm a fan. I like it.
This is from the early 80s.
Like it.
This Pacers sweatshirt that I'm wearing today, and we'll get back to the Colts point here in a second. Hang on just a second. I'm going to do this for the folks that are watching in the YouTube chat room. You're
Oh, you're going to sit back down. You're on the wrong camera.
Yeah,
you're on the wrong camera.
Well, I'm not the one that operates which cameras.
Well, you stood up,
You got to
so
push
I
one
switched.
button for this camera right here.
Okay, hold on. There you go.
We're both smiling now.
This sweatshirt was sent to me by a loyal listener of the morning show when I was on the morning show. In about either 82 or 83, I believe season ticket holders were given an opportunity to buy like a package where they could go down and do like a workout for a day, like a fantasy Pacer type deal.
Yeah.
And these sweatshirts were distributed
Wow.
to those people. This would have been like the Clark Kellogg era Pacers. And a guy that listens to the show had found one at a thrift store, bought it, wore it. It was his favorite sweatshirt, and then unfortunately I think he said he had gained weight or he lost weight, one of the two, but it didn't fit him anymore. And he's like, you know what? You just seem like the dude that would want to have it.
That's cool.
So it's probably 43 years old.
That's awesome.
It just says Pacers basketball. But anyway, back to the Colts conversation. Gus Bradley, in fact, is out, and we'll talk about that over the course of today. The defensive coordinator for the Colts is, with no big surprise,
I feel bad for
out.
Gus Bradley, but it is comical because it was the most predictable move of.
But here's the thing:
maybe
the coaching staff. Do you know what many of the coaches for the Colts on the offensive side of the football have in common with a lot of the players?
What's that?
They came into the season knowing that they were not on a hot seat. Most of the players, because it was team run back, came into Grand Park back in August knowing, I'm good. They're going to give this thing another spin. I was the starter a year ago. Doesn't look like they really put anybody behind me to push me. I'm good. And a lot of the coaches came in saying, look, I'm a guy that's learning on the job. I'm a young, up-and-coming, bright, big future expectation, high-ceiling coach. They're going to give me time to grow, baby. I'm good. The one coach that is a veteran coach who's been in the league and therefore the expectation and the ceiling was right now was Gus Bradley. Other coaches, it's like, well, they got time to grow into the job. That Shane Steichen's got time to learn. You know, he's going to make adjustments. Jim Bob Cooter's got, he's going to make adjustments. Different coaches. Reggie Wayne is a receiver coach. He's a young coach. He's learning. He can make adjustments. Gus Bradley, it's like old dog, new tricks, man. This ain't working. Gone. Right?
Yeah.
I think it needs a reset in terms of the expectation of, look, nobody is safe, right?
And again,
I don't mean of losing their job. I don't mean of getting released. I just mean of you need to create culture where people are competing every single day.
No, and that's what kind of DeForest Buckner was asking for after the fact now, is the hope that they wind up bringing in free agents and bring in more competition. But from the Gus Bradley standpoint, yes, I hate when anybody loses their job. And I do think it is to put some type of head on a platter, but also it is justified. Like, that group was horrific. I think part of the blame still relies on the fact that they did deal with injuries and there were issues, especially in the secondary, that we called for to be addressed all season that Chris Ballard never did, but they were a bad group. And you'd seen enough, I think, of Gus Bradley's scheme to be able to overcompensate and overcome the deficiencies on the roster that Chris Ballard failed to address. So I get the firing. It just would have been more comfort to me, and I think for Colts fans, had it been the carte blanche firing across the board versus just Gus Bradley's head that's now rolling from West 56.
One of the things that I think to keep an eye on now is how many more, if there are, head coaching vacancies are created. How many more head coaches around the league lose their job only because I think some of the names, Jimmy, that we're going to hear about that the Colts may have an interest in towards their defensive coordinator openings, some of those names are probably going to also be candidates for head coaching jobs elsewhere. And certainly you would take a head coaching job over a coordinator job. Most people would, although unless you're Chip Kelly, right?
There's a risk of Eddie immediately joining the program now and dunking on me for this.
Oh.
And to be clear, schematically,
I'm not sure Eddie's here.
Well,
I'm here.
He went out like 10 minutes ago to get coffee.
Are you sure it was coffee?
It's a fair point. I am curious, and I don't know enough about his scheme to know if it would even work in what Chris Ballard wants, but he will be a popular name in defensive coordinator positions. I am curious if they interview or have a conversation with Lou Amaruno. That Bengals group, while they suffered the last 2 seasons, were great and were the ascension point of complimentary football to Joe Burrow when they made the run to the Super Bowl. They did get better as the season went on, and they also dealt with their own questionable moves done by the front office. He's 59 years old, but he's been around the league a good amount of time. I don't know if they want to get younger, if they want to stay kind of middle of the pack, but he would be a name that would be curious to me, at least to have a conversation with.
I think the name to monitor would be a guy they interviewed for the head coaching job here 2 years ago in Wink Martindale.
Sure.
currently at Michigan. He was their defensive coordinator. But one thing to keep in mind when we start discussing and watching these names filter through, as I think Lou I always have trouble saying his last name.
Anaruno, that's all right.
Thank you. I think he'll have a ton of suitors, and I think the Colts would get ruled out for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you look at the Colts defense, you're like, okay, who is it that I'm building around?
Sure.
There's not a dominant edge rusher. You got DeForest Buckner. You got Zaire Franklin. That's about it. There's not a lockdown corner. And additionally, are you now a lame duck defensive coordinator? Are you going to only be here for 1 year and not be able to build up a system in which it takes multiple years to get your guys in here?
Potentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because if Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard are attached to the hip, you would have to assume if Anthony Richardson doesn't show any progress in his development next season, both of those guys are gone. Therefore, your defensive coordinator is probably out of a job.
It's also a job
next year,
step back as well. I know he just got fired, but you go from in theory, contender in the AFC to a full rebuilding project. Is that something that he wants to go and be a part of? I don't know. But he's always been a name that I've admired, and they're going to have a long laundry list of candidates, Jake, they can go through. The question is, how much mutual interest is there?
Do you know what Cyndi Lauper, Hootie and the Blowfish, Culture Club, those are the first that came to mind. Do you know what they have in common in terms of hit songs?
I do not.
They all about girls?
They probably do have that as well, right? All of them have a song. There's got to be others. Off the top of your head, if any of them come to mind, songs that have to do with time.
Time after time.
That's Cyndi Lauper, right? Time after time.
Yeah.
That's Cyndi Lauper, right?
I believe so. I only know the song. Can't help you there.
The Hootie and the Blowfish. Then you've got Culture Club. Time, don't give me time. But bottom line is, when it comes to the Colts, you've got like 3 different musical acts that all can be talking about time, but they're coming from different eras because the timing doesn't work out, to Eddie's point.
I was really hoping for Time of Your Life by Green Day to finally end this charade over there on West 56.
Ozzy Osbourne, I think, also has a song about time, doesn't he? Time after time.
That's Cyndi Lauper.
I guess that. No, I'm sorry. There are 2 Time After Time.
There
Cyndi
are,
Lauper
sure.
and Ozzy Osbourne. Sorry, that might have been the one Jimmy was going for. But my point being, time is very important to the Colts because you have varying tunes in terms of time. DeForest Buckner might only have, in terms of the level of play that he's given him, which is at a very high level, but he's got a shorter amount of time than if Anthony Richardson starts to all of a sudden get footing. He's got a long amount of time, right? Jonathan Taylor, how much longer does he have? To your point, if you're a D coordinator coming in and you're a guy that thinks you're signing up for a job that's going to be 10 years, but you know that the coach is on like a 1-year retainer, so to speak, what happens then? It just gets very, very tricky. But we'll continue discussing that over the course of the show. And there is a rumor du jour involving the Indiana Pacers, who got a big one last night, and they got a big one in front of a guy that's rumored to be in discussion with them. What does that all mean? I'll try to put that all together. And by the way, it was Mike, I think. Was it Mike or John? Hang on just a second. That sent me the sweatshirt. I'm all over. It's a sleep deprivation Tuesday. I didn't sleep well last night. John, by the way.
Well, thank you, John.
John sent me the message. John, thank you so much. The sweatshirt is absolutely awesome. I wear it all the time, actually, but it's the first time Jimmy's noticed it. But we will get into that Pacer conversation. What's the rumor and who's it involved? That conversation next. So last night, the Pacers were in Brooklyn to take on the Nets, and the very shorthanded Nets, mind you, right? And the Nets of Brooklyn have a young player, Jimmy, who is out with injury and actually has been kind of like an Anthony Richardson type because you know he's going to be a good player, but injury has been an issue.
D'Angelo Russell isn't young.
That's right. In terms of Cam Johnson being unavailable. But he is rumored, and I'm using air quotes, the Pacers are, quote, a team to watch, say some reports, in terms of a trade that could be used to get Cam Johnson. Now, the package that was floated out there involved a name that I'm going to say not going to happen. Do you believe, Jimmy, that there are any members of this roster, or do you believe there are any members of this roster that would be deemed untouchable in trade conversation?
Now, the clarifier, by me or by the Pacers?
By the Pacers.
Yes. I think Tyrese Halliburton is an untouchable player. I don't think they're moving on from him. I think they're pretty much steadfast that he is the franchise piece.
Anybody else?
We talked about this during the summertime, and this kind of walks into directly where the rumors are. I would argue with the value of the contract and still having control for 3 more seasons, that Aaron Nesmith is probably in that same category.
Okay. See, I would agree, and that's the thing. So, Aaron Nesmith is a name that is floated almost more so because if they are, and this comes down to what's interesting for the Pacers, if the Pacers decide that they want to re-sign Miles Turner, which I think they would like to, they have to take into consideration how they are going to make salary room for themselves to get Turner to resign. Now, what's interesting is they probably would like to prohibit Turner from going onto the open market and upping that price. But, strictly my opinion, he's an interesting player because Miles Turner, to me, is far more important and valuable to Indiana than he would be to most teams. I think he is an incredible part of what they want to do. I think he's an incredibly important player in terms of their defense, the way that they run their offense, et cetera, et cetera. And the way that he plays, the style that he plays, rim protection, facilitating break, trail break, hit 3 if the first pass or 2 does not facilitate in a quick half-court set and he's trailing the play and hits an open 3 top of the key. That sort of a skill set and that style, while can translate anywhere, isn't necessarily what other teams play. And so if you are, and I'm just going to throw names out off the top of my head, franchises, Portland, Dallas, and Cleveland, I don't know that Miles Turner has the financial value to you to pay as a top 3 or 4 player like he does in Indiana. So the irony being that the Pacers probably want to avoid him going into the open market, but at the same time, they may find that they actually that might only prove that they are willing to pay more in the open market than are most franchises. But yes, it is true that if you were going to re-sign Miles Turner, which I think they would like to do, and I think it would be, a smart thing for them to do, there are those pieces that you have that are very important right now that you're going to probably have to sacrifice and lose. And Aaron Nesmith's name would come up for that, but I think Nesmith, and I think what we're seeing right now is how important Nesmith is to them, even though they obviously are playing much better now. They are playing really well on the road. They've won, 9 of 12 or something like that. Yep. They're over 500. And
the road turnaround's been incredible.
Totally. And the road turnaround, though, a big part of that is their defense. He only accentuates their defense, and he is probably, in terms of overall versatility, he's probably their best defender. So he's very important to what they want to do going from here. I just have a hard time believing that Neesmith is a name that if he's in the package that they'd say, okay, let's continue to explore.
Well, and it's going to be tough with any trade, especially somebody on the billing of Cam Johnson. And by billing, I don't mean like name billing. I mean literal dollars billing. When you look at the cap hit that he's going to have the next couple of years. And I'm curious to talk a little bit more in depth as we go into the week on Thursday with Tony East, who is, the guru of all things in this market, about cap and financial constraints that teams have to operate underneath. But you have to match salaries. You have to make sure that you're not taking in too much in those trade discussions. From a math standpoint, the reason that Cam Johnson's name is being floated out there is because you can make it work for the Pacers if you're moving two names of big money contract. But the pairing that they're looking at, if you've seen the report, it includes Obi Toppin and Aaron Neesmith. Part of that, I think, is the value of Neesmith's contract, but also it's because that would financially match the right way. They're also saying the rumor mill is of maybe a future unprotected first in there, or whatever the case may be, but the Pacers have to get creative if this is real. I tend to think with where it's coming from, not the initial conversations from Brett Siegel. Brett's somebody who's been on the show before. I like him. But whenever you see something in the aggregated accounts like Legion Hoops and they start to paraphrase and take things out of context, I really tend to look at it and say, that's probably just what it is, which is whispers. But the Cam Johnson aspect of things, he plays a 3/4 position. If you rule out this year on a bad Nets team, he's probably going to average 12 or 13 points a game, a relatively efficient three-point shooter in terms of the scope of his career, and you would have him for 3 seasons of control, albeit a $20 million evaluation. So it's not the worst contract in the world, but with where the Pacers are right now, Eddie.
Is that AAV, Jimmy?
That is just based on what I think I use Spot Rack this time, has him year by year. But yes, it could be AAV.
I know Jake loves AAV.
And Jake is a big fan of AAV, no doubt about that.
That if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Mick Ultra and Bud Light have a lower AAV than like Sun King, right?
Yeah, correct.
Like Osiris and that kind of thing?
Yeah,
okay.
you're right on that.
Sure.
The
IPA's higher AAV,
yes.
right?
Yeah,
okay.
For sure. I don't buy it happening because based on the moves that this front office tends to make, even though the Miles Turner in the room has to be addressed because that's a conversation that they can't extend him. I know that, but you just don't want that to be the major talking point this offseason, even though it might be inevitable. Based on current trends, and Eddie, you tell me if I'm way off base on this, them turning a corner, winning 9 of their last 12, starting to get healthier, it would really surprise me for a rock the boat type of move of bringing in Cam Johnson when what you believed in to start the season is finally rounding into form.
They will have to make a move, I think, in my estimation, whether that's upgrading to add another piece, because they're one piece or maybe even 2 pieces away from realistically being in that championship contention conversation. But they're going to have to make a consolidation move if they want to retain Miles, because right now they are, I think it's $100,000 underneath the luxury tax. And that's something you don't want to do if you're a team that's not contending for a championship. So, and plus with the way Mathurin has played defensively more so than offensively over the last 2 weeks, it's been more of what we saw from Aaron Neesmith last season. Like, he's staying in front of defenders. He's taking contact. He's playing really, really well in the defensive end. And Rick Carlisle had a very long praising comments earlier this morning on the wake-up call with KB and Andy about Mathurin, and seeing the report from Brett Siegel that they would potentially be open to trading Neesmith, I think is more tied to the fact of the way that Mathurin has been playing the last 3 weeks than anything else.
I think Mathurin's done an excellent job of reinventing himself is the wrong way of saying it, but finding areas
the Pacers want to do.
Correct.
And he's grown in the system.
Well, he's grown just as a player in general, because to be able to sacrifice your own game for the betterment of what your team needs requires growth for anybody. And Mathurin is one that when he came in, you looked at him and said, okay, there was the thought that that this was going to be, this franchise has been interesting because it was, obviously after Reggie Miller, you've had this number of players that people thought were going to be the next guy. It was Danny Granger for a while. It was actually Roy Hibbert for a short period. Then obviously Paul George for a long time. then Victor Oladipo, and then there was some thought in between those two, like Miles Turner maybe when he was younger. People are like, oh, okay, that's the new face. There was some thought that Matherin could be that guy, and he has a dog mentality of like, get out of my way.
That's why I think he still could be.
He still could be, for sure. But what I'm saying is, what a year ago when he was first exerting who he was, it was as a microwave scorer. That was his thing, right? And defensively, you know, Rick Carlisle challenged him a little bit. If you want to stay on the floor, you got to play some defense. And for him to buy into that now and say, you know what, I am going to do that. I'll shelf aside the 28 a game, 25 a game to get a couple lockdowns, to facilitate in other areas is impressive. It takes some growth for certain. No question about it. We talked about it. Colts, by the way, looking for a new defensive coordinator. Stephen Holder going to join us. Stephen joining us top of the hour. Is that correct, Eddie?
Yes, sir.
18 minutes away. Stephen joins us. We'll get back into that conversation. Okay, let's get into it this way, Jimmy. This is what concerns me, and I know that this is like a thing I harp on.
Just the one?
That's right. I'm going to name a player, and I want you to tell me how many years away from their prime you believe they are and how long their prime will be. Okay?
Okay.
Jonathan Taylor.
I would say currently in it in the back half of it.
So how many more years?
2.
Okay. DeForest Buckner.
Probably in it right now, I would say about 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Grover Stewart.
In it currently, I don't remember off the top of my head. I apologize how old Grover Stewart is. I don't want to botch
He
that
will
in that regard.
be 31 next season.
Okay, so I would say a year or 2 left in that.
Him and
regard.
Buckner are 31, 32, so
Okay.
I get them flip-flopped.
Michael Pittman.
In it right now, 3 to 4.
Okay. Alec Pierce.
Not there yet. I'd be mapping out a deep threat wide receiver. We'll say a 3 or 4 year prime for him whenever that arrives. Still building.
Okay. To give you a couple more. Josh Downs.
Approaching it, but he's the type of receiver that the way he's utilized, I could see him having a nice long career that has an extended prime.
So let's say you got 6 to 7 more years out of him.
Yeah.
Okay. Zaire Franklin.
In it right now, 3 to 4.
Anthony Richardson.
Definitely not in it. You certainly hope he's not in it, because if you are,
Correct.
then
If he's
you
in it,
might
you're
as
in
well
trouble.
clean house right now.
But let's say if we're speaking optimistically about Anthony Richardson's future, he's how far away to where you go, yeah, he's really starting to click.
I would have a hard time saying he's not 2 years away from being there. And if he gets there, he could have, taking injuries out of it. I know that's partially unfair, but taking injuries out of it, I don't see why he couldn't have, if he figures it out, a 10-year career in the NFL.
Okay. So let's say if he's 2 years from entering into his prime, and he would have how many prime years? 5?
5 to 8.
So you would be 5 years removed from the middle of his prime. Based on that equation, in the middle of Anthony Richardson's prime, you have no more Jonathan Taylor. You have no more DeForest Buckner. You have no more Grover Stewart. You have exiting prime Michael Pittman, exiting prime or maybe a couple of years left of it of Alec Pierce, in prime of Josh Downs, and no more Zaire Franklin. I say that only because, and I know that I harp on this, and I apologize for it, but it's the standard by which we use here in Indianapolis, as it's the only measuring stick that we have. The only time that we have seen this organization start from scratch and build itself a perennial Super Bowl contender and eventual Super Bowl champion. You did so with a quarterback as your franchise, where you made a change at running back from a Pro Bowl Hall of Fame running back that was in prime. And at the time, we're trading this guy for Mike Peterson and Brad Scioli, but you bring in Edgerrin James. Edgerrin James in his prime, same as Peyton Manning in his prime. As a matter of fact, Edgerrin James is the only one really that was there from when the seeds were planted that was not on the Super Bowl team, because what did they do? Even when Edgerrin James had gas left in the tank, they said, we need somebody fresher, and they went with Joseph Adai, who actually was a pretty underrated player, because Joseph Adai was a really good, like Edgerrin James, a very good blocking back, and Peyton Manning needed that. But then, Marvin Harrison, he was the guy that was already here, but then you still went out and you draft Reggie Wayne. You still go out, even though you had Marcus Pollard and Ken Dilger, you still go out and you draft Dallas Clark. And people are like, what are they doing drafting receivers and tight ends? They need, defense. Well, they used a late trade to get Booger McFarland, but they draft Bob Sanders. They draft, not even undrafted, they acquire and grow Gary Brackett. They draft Freeney and Mathis. All of those, all to time up so that in 2005 or 2006, if you were to look at that roster, the vast majority of players, as you look down the experience line, you're seeing 5, 6, 7. 80% of the roster was hitting prime simultaneously. The problem the Colts have right now is exactly that, because they have had to go to the well too many times to keep reinventing or trying to reinvent the same positions they've been drafting, and then bring in, whether it be a veteran or whatever it might be, and in particular at the quarterback position, where you now have Anthony Richardson that you put in there at the quarterback spot, but it doesn't feel like there's a great amount of vision of being able to have other flowers in the garden that were planted at the same time.
Well, there's one thing you're clinging to if you're a Colts fan and if you're Chris Ballard with the bleak outlook that we just gave there. The quarterback, it's a cliche for a reason, but it's true. The quarterback fixes everything in the league. Look at what the Commanders just enjoyed this year with Jaden Daniels. I know I'm asking a big leap there, and the Colts are betting on a big leap happening from Anthony Richardson, but if it's next year instead of 2 years from now that it all clicks for him and he's completing above 50% of his passes and he looks as balanced throwing the football as he does running, that masks roster deficiencies and can help you get away with or dance around where primes are or where primes could be. Regrettably, though, then the other shoe that's falling is the payday upcoming in a year or two of Anthony Richardson financially, and then you're having to play hardworking chess to map the roster out to begin with.
You're hoping that they are in the predicament where they've got to come up with money to pay Anthony Richardson, right?
Yes, because then you would have solved that issue, but so much of it, Jake, hinges on, is it a year from now? A year from now, are we saying, man, what a great season from Anthony Richardson? Or a year from now, are we saying, I don't think he has it yet? And that ultimately is going to decide a lot of the fates of everybody at West 56 a year from now.
Stephen Holder is with ESPN.com. I am sure he is busy working on a number of different things, but he is going to carve out just a little bit of time, and he's going to do it for us next. So the Colts are the one domino that's fallen is Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator, is out. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire. I know, if you were just joining us, by the way.
Where in the hell have you been?
Then you didn't know that news maybe. But joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is Stephen Holder from ESPN.com. Stephen, let's begin with that. That obviously was, I don't think, a huge surprise. I guess the first question I would have is this the last domino to fall?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how far down we're talking. If you're talking about other assistant coaches, there'll be some collateral damage there, you would imagine, on that defensive staff beyond Gus Bradley. But I think the question is, beyond that, in terms of bigger moves, staffing-wise, I don't know that there would be. The question for me is, one question is, does Shane Steichen make any changes on the offensive coaching staff? I have no indication of that. But like I said, I would anticipate a majority of, if not all of those defensive coaches will probably not be retained as a result of this. That's just kind of how it goes.
You know, Jimmy asked an interesting question, Stephen, and that is, let's just say that you are a potential defensive coordinator. You're a candidate to come in for this job. Do you think somebody who is going to be coming in and looking at joining this staff feels comfortable that it's a staff that is going to be here beyond next year? And if you feel that Shane Steichen is not a solid multi-year guy, why would you go into a situation that could well lead to a change above you 1 year from now?
No, I actually feel very strongly they are not in an optimal position to get a leading candidate. Not at all. And you just outlined why. I mean, if you are Robert Saleh, I mean, I guess the rumor is, I don't know if this is confirmed, but there's so much happening I can't keep up. But he is thought to be perhaps going back to San Francisco. But if you're Robert Saleh, for example, let's say that wasn't an option. Are you going to go take a job under a head coach you're not sure about? Or would you go work for Kyle Shanahan? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not a hard decision. So I actually do think the uncertainty, it will prevent them from maybe getting an elite candidate for this job. I mean, if you had a Myles Garrett or two, that would change things. DeForest Buckner is a wonderful player. Everybody knows it. But I think once you get beyond him, I think that's another question, right? Who are the guys who are so good and so compelling as players on that defense? Not good, but like, how many great players do you have? Not good, but great. So where a defensive coordinator candidate might say, I got to go coach that guy. They don't have enough of that either. So it's not a compelling job in my estimation.
Stephen, you kind of walked into my question there and answered half of it, but if there was not turmoil around the head coach, around the GM, and around the state of the franchise, is there enough for any coach to weigh their options around the land right now that are open and say, you know what, Indianapolis is for me? And you kind of mentioned most of it with the lack of pieces, but is some of that looking year by year, as I assume a candidate would do, with what the general manager has done for that side of the ball and saying to themselves, well, that's not a place I want to go because they're not dropping in the right talent for me? Does that factor in?
Well, I think it depends on what the reception is. If you were to interview for the job, for example, what is the reception to the idea of personnel changes? I would say this: most defensive coordinators most coordinators in general, offensive, defensive, who have some kind of cachet. If they're someone who's accomplished at all, they're going to come in and say, okay, look, I have some things that I'd like us to talk about. And you can go back to, for example, when Gus Bradley was when he arrived. I mean, one of the things that they did for him eventually was they brought in Yannick Ngakoue, for example, who had been with him in Las Vegas with the Raiders, and he liked the idea of Ngakoue playing that Leo position, which is like the wide defensive end in their system. The point is that was a priority for him, was to get someone who could play that specific role in his specific defense, and that guy was Yannick Ngakoue. So that's an example. If you are the next defensive coordinator, are they going to be open to those kinds of things? If they are, then that maybe changes the conversation a little bit. Because you want to ensure that you can succeed. And one of the ways you do that is to get the personnel that you want. So I have to think, look, I would be surprised if there aren't some changes on defense this year, because there kind of have to be some changes. You're changing schemes. So it's an opportunity to look at your defense, if you're the Colts, and say, all right, what pieces fit and what don't? And can there be upgrades in the process? I don't know how that's going to go, but that's the way a logical team would do it.
Stephen Holder is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, let's go back to, the announcement from Jim Irsay. I know we're going back what feels like a week ago, but it was just 48 hours ago, that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen would return. Do you believe that decision and that message from Jim Irsay was done, say, that evening, or was this something that he had made his mind up on, let's say, even going into the Giants game, and what happened was irrelevant? I mean, obviously what happened was irrelevant, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. First of all, it's my position that he was always leaning that way. And frankly, I don't think he was even contemplating it. I'm trying to read minds here, right? So bear with me. But I mean, my perception is that Jim Irsay was not truly contemplating it until the Giants game. And even then, I'm not sure he did contemplate it. He acknowledged, let's put it this way, he acknowledged in his statement, which I think is notable, that there was a groundswell of desire from the fan base to make a change. Like he acknowledged that, I thought, very openly, and I give Jim Irsay credit for that. He didn't just try to pretend everything's great. So he at least didn't do that. So that's a good thing. So it's notable for him to say, look, I know some of you are going to hate this, but this is where we're going. So that is, I think, a step at least to say we got to figure something out. That's a good sign. But I don't think, every indication I got, I talked to a number of people, and I never, ever got any indication that anybody thought a change was coming. That doesn't guarantee you anything. I can't, I'm not saying I knew, I didn't know, but I certainly got no indication a change was coming. And a lot of times with these things, there's smoke, when Frank Reich got fired, I think back to that. If you watch his press conference, after the last loss, which was at New England, the day before his firing, they had an ugly loss against the Patriots. You watch Frank Reich's press conference, he looks like a guy who knows that he's fired. I asked him about that subsequently, and he said, I knew. I just knew. And so I lay that out to say, in this instance, looking back, no one had any indication that some big change was coming, and it turns out that there wasn't. And I think that was maybe because it had been made known to people.
Stephen, I think back like you. Sometimes you look back on things and you go, I always make the point here. It's like the movie The Sixth Sense. My apologies for the spoiler alert for those people who have not taken the last 31 years to see it. But at the end of the movie, you go, oh, my gosh, he was dead the whole time. How did I not know that? And then you look back on the scenes and you're like, oh, holy cow, I look back on Chris Ballard a year ago, not even a year ago, at the beginning of the season, when he said, look, I like our guys. And if that gets me fired, so be it. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said.
Right.
Do you think Chris Ballard knew at that point that this was not going to be his last year?
No, I don't know. I don't know that he could know that. I think that he has always been able to kind of govern himself with a certain confidence, because he does have the faith of his owner. I mean, it's clearly unwavering faith and has been for a long time. I think he knows that. He knows his standing with the Irsay family. And I think that's kind of liberating for Chris Ballard. It has to be. So maybe he didn't know, because you can't predict how 17 games are going to go, right? I mean, had they come out here and won 3 games, we were having a different conversation, right? But I do think to kind of take your question and just kind of expanded a little bit. I don't know that it was that specific, the knowledge, but his knowledge of knowing where he stands with the Irsays, that I think he could be confident about and was confident about, and he can remain confident about it, clearly.
Stephen Holder is our guest, covers the Colts for ESPN.com. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, DeForest Buckner made it a point in the following days since the season ended to say that he's active in free agency and, trying to recruit whoever he can to try to join forces here in Indianapolis. What would give Colts fans reasoning to believe that Chris Ballard is finally going to be aggressive with getting help outside the building?
Well, nothing. But let me first say one quick thing, a little bit off subject, but you mentioned DeForest Buckner. I want to say I'm active in the Professional Football Writers Association, and we tweeted this yesterday, but for those who don't know, every city has kind of a local chapter leader. I do that here. And one of the things that we do is we recognize a player every year. We vote collectively among local media, like the guy who was like most helpful in helping the media facilitate its job. And basically like, hey, when the chips were down, you were a guy who was accountable and stood up and said, hey, I'm going to do my job, the part of my job that requires me to make myself available to the media, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy who I thought went over and above to do that this year was DeForest Buckner. That guy became, I thought, an important voice, really in the past month in particular. He said everything that no one else had the courage to say. So I credit him a lot for that. So anyway, he was our winner this year, and I thank him a lot for having, frankly, the nerve to get up there and say, all right, you know what? I'll get up there and say we suck, when no one else will do it. So anyhow, to your question about having what gives people confidence, what should give people confidence that they will perhaps go out there and be active in free agency, the answer is nothing, because that's not what they do. Now, I still think, because I have common sense, that you can't govern yourself that way here. I'm operating under logic. We'll see if they are. My logic tells me, look, you got to do something. The people are about to grab pitchforks. You got to give them something. And so maybe reading between the lines, and maybe this is stupid, but maybe reading between the lines in Irsay's statement, maybe if you want, there's something there that tells you that there's an acknowledgement we have to do something different. But we'll see. I mean, that's why tomorrow is important, I think, in talking to Chris Ballard. What is going to be different? I want to know as well.
Here's the thing, Stephen. You know what DeForest Buckner – I mentioned this earlier. You know what DeForest Buckner has that Grover Stewart, Zaire Franklin, Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman Jr., Quentin Nelson – you know what he has that those guys don't have?
What's that?
Experience on winning teams.
Yes.
He's been, I know they didn't win the Super Bowl, but he's been to the Super Bowl. He's been a professional. He's been in environments of seemingly locker room wide accountability. And I think you can see that. To me, that is the two biggest problems for this particular installment of the Colts would be, number one, that they don't have enough of that. And number two, when you come out and basically say, and I'm not trying to throw Chris Ballard totally under the bus here. For that matter, the red line's gone over him 19 times from this city in the last 2 days. But when you come out and say we're running it back, most players are going to look at that and go, I'm good. And that extra 1% of work that has to go in is void, right? Because they're not challenged. Has this group been challenged?
No, that is exactly the point. And I think that's the most important thing. We've spent a lot of time in recent weeks talking about culture and all this BS. That's actually the culture problem that they have, if there is one. The culture problem they have is that they haven't had to earn what they have. And it is a product of Chris Ballard's decision making, and that's funny because you talked about the sixth sense earlier and seeing something after the fact and realizing it should have been obvious. I mean, I thought it made sense to a degree to say a year ago, all right, let's run it back. Now, I thought they should have did more. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they made no mistakes. I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about the overarching philosophy. To me, it made sense. I was like, all right, look, if you can't get the free agents you want because they're too expensive, you have some good pieces, your quarterback's coming back, maybe this could work. I bought it to a degree. I still think you can go sign a safety or a corner, like, a tight end, but whatever. The problem, though, is in hindsight now I realize, man, that was the blind spot. That was the blind spot there, which is what you outlined, which is it led to complacency, which is Chris Ballard's word. He's the one that said that, I'm sorry, DeForest Buckner's word, excuse me. He's the one that said it, and he's right. Who in training camp had to go defend their starting job? It was too easy, right? It was too easy. And the example that Buckner gave is a perfect example. There's one of a few guys that had to go out there and say, okay, I'm going to defend my turf, meaning my job, was Alec Pierce, because they had drafted A.D. Mitchell. Now, A.D. Mitchell didn't do a whole lot this year. However, his presence meant something. And what did Alec Pierce go out and do? He had the best damn season of his life. It matters. I totally agree with you.
So with that, Stephen, does that mean that we likely see a quarterback that comes in next year, not to start per se, but to have the insinuation to Anthony Richardson that it's got to be done every hour of every day of every week?
I fully expect it. I think you have to. Even if you think he's your guy, and you could even say to yourself, he's still our starter. I don't know how you govern that part. I'll let them figure that out, but there has to be another viable quarterback in the building who's not 40 years old. That's what I think. And so we'll see how that goes, but I fully expect that. It's why I asked Anthony yesterday, if that scenario occurs, how will you digest it? He did have the right answer. He says, you know what, I'm a competitor. Let's do it. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to show him that I'm the right guy. I love that. That's the right thing to say. The words don't mean a lot because they're just words, but he's got his head in the right place, and it shows that he understands the realities of this. Because look, Shane Steichen. Well, let me back up. Chris Ballard can now, after the fact, he did say this in a recent interview, that he had some regrets about maybe starting Anthony so early on. And I'm like, well, buddy, you guys determined that right out of the gate. They were never not going to start Anthony Richardson as a rookie. In fact, Shane Steichen installed him as the starter after one quarter of preseason football. And I didn't disagree necessarily. All I'm saying is don't second guess it now. I mean, like you didn't even consider an alternative. So like it kind of rings hollow, right? So anyway, I think that is what needs to change around here. And there's too many guys that are in love with being in the NFL as opposed to doing what it takes to succeed in the NFL. Those two things are not the same.
By the way, Jimmy, did you notice a slight breeze just a second ago?
I did, Jake.
All of a sudden, I looked over, and there was a slight breeze, and the door was ajar, and lo and behold.
Oh, man.
That is correct. It is me, Robin the Genie, Jimmy. Good afternoon to you.
Twice in a month.
I'm
only
a big
7
fan
days in.
of Stephen Holder. Stephen, have you, I cannot recall if you and I have spoken before. Are you familiar with Robin the Genie, Stephen?
I am. He is definitely a legend, yes.
So, Stephen, as you know, the way I do this is I present to you a question, and if it comes true, I will grant you $1 million. And it is my understanding that you had to pay for part of Jake's dinner the other night, so you need the money, as I understand. So my question for you, Stephen Holder, is this. I need you to write down the name of one veteran quarterback in the National Football League. And if he is a member of the Indianapolis Colts in September, you get $1 million. I'm talking about one that is not currently on the roster. Who do you decide to go with?
So, I mean, look, the guy I can't get past is Justin Fields. And I don't know what he'll cost, but that's the guy I'm predicting. And so a fun fact, I probably have said this before on this radio station. A lot of time has passed, but Chris Ballard at one point was a big Justin Fields guy as he was entering the NFL. He was definitely intrigued by Justin Fields. So we'll see what happens there. He's a free agent. Russell Wilson clearly is the starter in in Pittsburgh. So I'm interested to see what happens with Justin and if he ends up here.
The other one, somebody made this prediction to me the other day. They said, you know what, I can see it now. I said, what's that? And this was actually like a month ago somebody that said this to me. They said the Colts are going to sign Daniel Jones, and then Anthony Richardson's going to get hurt in week 4, and Daniel Jones is going to be their starter for like 13 weeks. He does kind of feel like he has the same type of not the same skill set as Richardson and Fields, but he is a guy that can be mobile, right, along with throwing the football. Am I correct?
Yeah. Now, I do need to double check. I'm trying to think. Well, I guess he is technically a free agent.
Yeah, I
now,
think he just signed for the rest of the year, right?
Yeah. So he's. I'm actually confirming that now, and I'm looking at it. So he is going to be technically a free agent. I'm interested to see what the Vikings do there. It's probably contingent on what happens with Sam Darnold. Obviously, a lot of moving parts, but I could see it. Look, I mean, I think it could do worse. Look, I'm not a Daniel Jones guy, but I think you're also talking about the Giants, right? I mean, we're judging him by that franchise and some of the things that have gone on there, and just the lack of talent around him, to be completely honest, right? So that was a factor. So yes, I could see something like that. It would be intriguing. Let's put it that way.
Steven,
and that's where, look, Shane Steichen. I do think Shane Steichen with a conventional quarterback who is just like a guy who can just go out and execute, a la Gardner Minshew. He can get a lot out of a guy like that. So Anthony Richardson is a much different quarterback, right? He's a raw talent, and they're trying to sort of, they're trying to bring him along, but he has this otherworldly talent and skill set that's in addition to that. So he's a much different guy. But if you just take a guy who can say, all right, look, here's the offense, here is your first read, second read, go make a play. I mean, Shane can kind of get that guy to his ceiling, to a degree. I thought he did that with Gardner Minshew. So I'm open to different ideas at that position.
Steven, if I might be in this instance a little early to the party, I acknowledge that. But if Anthony Richardson has a setback season where he's dealing with injuries again, there's not suddenly another token of life given to this organization, is there? If that happens, does this feel like to you a all or nothing season for them, regardless of what arrives, or is there room for grace?
I don't imagine there would be. You're talking about beyond him. You're talking about the leadership, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about Chris Ballard. Like if Richardson winds up sputtering again and doesn't stay healthy, and they go 6-11, there's not he was hurt, we'll give him another pass on that, is there?
Well, I don't even think, even if Chris Ballard were to survive that, which would be amazing, okay? Even if he were to survive it, I just don't know that even he would say we're willing to wait another year at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know that anybody would be willing, Chris Ballard included, would be willing, to say, let's try it again a fourth year.
Would that motivate them further to bring in a significant name at backup QB to have a break glass in case of emergency type of deal? Because ordinarily you talk about it just for development and growth for the QB, but if you're talking about saving jobs, does that suddenly incentivize them to go get an established backup?
I mean, it probably does. You would think. Look, I mean, Anthony Richardson's standing right now, today, a couple days after this season, is lower than it was a year ago, coming off his rookie season. That is undeniable, even though he had missed 13 games with a shoulder injury last year, right? I mean, I don't think you can argue that his standing right now is lower. He has a lesser standing right now than he did a year ago. So given that reality, you can't enter 2025 viewing him in the same light. Even if you think he's going to make it, even if you believe that, you probably have to operate differently, is what I'm saying.
Steven, who do you believe, or who are you more intrigued to see how they respond to an offseason of negative chatter about them? Anthony Richardson or Shane Steichen? Because Shane Steichen this time a year ago was the wonder boy. And now people are like, man, I don't know, et cetera, et cetera. And he's never been in that position in the crosshairs either.
So I think Anthony is going to be who he is. He doesn't really respond to the outside noise very much. Now he needs to respond internally, to whatever is being asked of him. That's a different question, right? But I would say this about Shane Steichen. I think if you're one of those fans who really pay attention, you watch the press conferences online and you parse words and all that. If you do that, I think you can see a lot of examples this year where Shane Steichen was saying things early on that he was defending because he was being questioned about to now he's doing something different. Okay, so one example is how he's used Jonathan Taylor, for example. Go back to the Packers game in, what was that, week 2, 3? He took him off the field for the entire fourth quarter, and after the game, we were flabbergasted, and we said, Shane, what the hell are you doing? And he said, oh, no, we were in passing mode. And we were like, we don't care. What? And so what happened by the end of the season? Jonathan Taylor wasn't coming off the field for very often, right? So I think that's just one example where, and I can show you 2 or 3 other examples. So I think that's one example where he finally caved and said, okay, maybe I don't have it all figured out. Now, he needs to continue to do that. He's still a young coach, and I think there are some blind spots for young coaches, and he's got to see them and look back and fix them. So we'll see if he can do that. And one example real quick is also, I thought, the design runs with Anthony Richardson. Now, there's another component there, right, health. But early in the season, they were clearly avoiding that I thought, to their peril. And so after the benching, they came back, and it's frankly the reason they beat the Jets and the Patriots, right? So anyway, I think that's another example where he just evolved over the course of the season because he freaking had to, and he just stopped being stubborn about things.
Stephen Holder's our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, and he is, of course, with ESPN.com. Tomorrow we will carry live at 9 a.m. tentatively for Chris Ballard's press conference at the end of the year. Stephen, do you anticipate anything groundbreaking to come from that? And do you think we will see, as we have in the past, to his credit, a contrite and humbled Chris Ballard?
I think you'll see that, yes, the latter. And the reason is, as much as he sometimes is a little bit, I'm smarter than you are, he does have a little bit of that sometimes, and that's fine. What I would also say is he's also smart and very perceptive, and he knows the environment right now is that we hate this guy. He knows that, so he's smart enough, I think, to be sensitive to that, and he's going to, I think, say what people want to hear. He might not go all the way with it, but he's definitely, I think he's going to govern himself like a guy who's under fire, and that means you'll watch your words. Now,
the one guy that keeps posting on social media that he's going to send dog poo to Chris Ballard's house in the mail every day until he leaves. Now, that seems a little extreme, right?
I mean, it's not the way I'd go about it. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to do
you just
that,
give it to him in person.
If you want to do that for Matt Foley on Saturday Night Live, that's fine. Fido had something to do with this, but I think beyond that, it might be a little much. But taking
look, people are really angry right now. I mean, I want everybody to take a breath and go take a walk. Well, don't take a walk because then you have to shovel the sidewalk. But take a breath. Go outside for 2 minutes before you get cold and take a deep breath. Everybody needs to chill. I mean, look, it's bad, and I get it.
Now, you don't say chill when you tell them to take a deep breath in the cold, Stephen. That's the point, right? Warm up,
yes.
Right?
All right, I know you got to roll, but I had a guy, someone on Twitter castigate me. I mean, meanly castigate me because I said, yeah, I've known Gus Bradley for 15 years, which is true. And I said, I can say this about him. It didn't work out, but that guy has always been the same guy. He's just always been a good quality guy. People really respect him. Great human being. Oh, my God. People were pissed. And this one person just took me completely to task. Why don't you hold these people accountable? I'm like, what? So we just need to all take a deep breath is what I'm saying.
I know. It's always our fault, man. It's always our fault, right? That's just how it goes.
Yeah.
All right, Stephen, I will probably see you there tomorrow morning.
Oh, all right. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's to look forward to.
Put your sleuth hat on and ask some tough questions finally.
That's right. I'm going to hold people accountable. That's right.
That's right. I'm going to bring my gun and make sure that they're held accountable.
We'll see you there, Stephen. I think I am going to go. I think I am going to go because one of the questions I want to ask Ballard, frankly, is whether or not – well, I'll tell you. just a couple minutes. So I think one of the questions that, and maybe this has been asked of Chris Ballard, but I think it's a fair question. You tell me if you think it's a fair question, I guess I should say, Jimmy. I want to ask him, as I mentioned earlier, do you have the same salary cap as everyone else in the league? Are you put on any financial restrictions in terms of your free agency pursuits?
No, I think it's a perfectly fair question. It's one that you've brought up numerous times that we've pondered. I would be curious how he answers that, because is he open and transparent now? This appears to be the last hurrah to get it right.
Right.
Or is he still guarded and shielded like, well, we keep those financial decisions in-house and give you some blanket answer? But either way, I'd be curious as to what the answer was.
Because if you're him and that's the case, you want people to know it, right?
Yes. That would be a big deal. I mean, I'm not to say that they still couldn't have used the budget that he was given better outside of in-house re-signings, but yeah, if I was handcuffed as a general manager and I can't do my job because of it, I would want that out there in the public.
I think I'd like to ask him also just, what do you want to say to the fans? Like, not to us, not to the media, but to the fans. I mean, I think we know what he'll say, but, look, we have a standard also. We're disappointed. I mean, I get it. I'm not mocking that answer, but I'm anticipating that answer.
My most flippant question would be, are you surprised that you're still here? Like, I realize there's probably a better way to frame that where it doesn't sound as standoffish as I'm.
Were there periods this year where you thought you would not be sitting here having this conversation with us?
Yeah.
You
should ask him about the flat brim hat, too.
Because the further we get into it.
It is a good-looking hat.
The further we get down this tenure of him, the more those names of Buffalo and San Francisco and Kansas City as his running mate GMs that were hired around the same time, and the success gap is Grand Canyon sized. Like, that's only going to get louder.
Joining us now, by the way, we talked about the Pacers earlier as well. Impressive win last night in Brooklyn. Not necessarily impressive because of the fact that they were playing, for the most part, 3 guys from Pike and 5 from Lawrence North. But the fact that they really are playing well on the road and things look like they're coming together now. From Fieldhouse Files, the guy that was the first to tell us about the deal we now know to be official with the Pacers airing some games on WTHR. That's one of the things you would have known if you read Scott Agnes's work. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, we'll begin with this. We talked earlier about the fact there's, one of those, Cam Johnson is a player for the Nets that could be on the market for a trade. The Pacers are one of those teams in the interwebs that has been floated out there as a possible match, but it would involve, say, an Aaron Nesmith perhaps to be thrown in as they free up money to re-sign Miles Turner. A lot of ifs there. I don't personally believe Aaron Nesmith is a player the Pacers would move from. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a situation. First, if we're talking specifically with Cameron Johnson, there's going to be a lot of teams that are interested in him and his contract and all that, because he's got a pretty solid deal there. And it would take a lot more than Nesmith and Toppin and probably a couple first-round picks to make it happen. I don't think the Pacers have any urgency to move on from Nesmith whatsoever. And if anything, they can look here as we're approaching this trade deadline as if Nesmith's kind of one of those additions, because he's only played for 6 games. Now, with that said, if there is a guy on the market that they've been after for a while and can get them with the inclusion of a couple players, you have to go do it. It's time for a consolidation trade, I think, right now. They have the depth. They have the talent, but now we need to see them go and get that 6'8" forward that we've been talking about for 6 years now.
Scott, how much does the mentality of them starting to round into form, winners of 9 of their last 12, and the roster they believed in to start the year finally starting to come together? I know there's depth issues still in the front court, but how much of the prevailing wisdom of, well, we've turned a corner and we're starting to get healthy, maybe we don't need to be as aggressive as previously thought? Does that factor into this at all?
I think to an extent, although I don't think the direction of where they are right now versus earlier, the only thought maybe that changes is maybe you were like, all right, we really were that far off. We need to make a couple of changes versus now I think you're back where we all thought they would be, which is you got to canvas the market. You have to take all of these trades seriously and not just sit on your hands, but you don't need to necessarily do anything. They want to be in that prime position where they could. The challenge in all this that I want to reiterate to fans here, though, is they are limited very much in what they can do or take back. They are right up against the luxury tax, meaning they should not take in any more money than they send out in a potential trade, because then you're paying into the luxury tax, which would just be foolish with this group until you're a contending team. So that restricts a little bit what you're trying to do here in trying to make moves. But I think they have to realize, very much like the Colts, but they're much further along, is this is not a championship contending roster. So if you can make an upgrade, you do it.
Okay, so what's missing from it being a championship? I mean, Well, I mean, I don't know. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. I get that, but I'm saying realistically, what is it? What's the missing link?
You're missing that guy at the 3 spot out on the wing. That's a versatile player that can defend, that can go knock down shots. The challenge in all this, Jake, right, is it's the most coveted position in the game. So every team is after a player, a scorer, a two-way guy like this, a guy that the Pacers really have not truly had probably since Paul George.
Yeah, I was going to say, does it need to be prime Paul George, or are we talking about somebody that even, a year away Jarris Walker could be?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that as long as you've seen a little bit more. Like you don't want to do a project by any means. And if anything, by the way, if you're the Pacers, you're hoping maybe that's Mathurin or maybe that's Jarris Walker. But I think when you're having conversations with other teams, I think you have to recognize that if you go get a guy of significant value or more value than he's a couple years away, it might take a Mathurin or a Walker to be included in a type deal to do something like that. But all along, they need more defense, and that starts with that 3 spot.
Scott, in your mind, ignoring the pieces required to go get him, because I don't necessarily support moving on from either of Nesmith or Toppin, what would Cam Johnson change about this roster if they were to acquire him, and you can map out a scenario or two of who are more reasonable pieces maybe to include in such a deal? Because the roster is going to change in some capacity, but like what kind of upgrade or addition is he versus what would be going out in your mind?
Yeah, so he would be a little bit more expensive, first of all, so you would have to recognize that and make the financials work. That's the first thing that this front office would have to consider. He's a good scorer, much more so than a Toppin or a Nesmith, although Toppin has had some bright spots over the last several games in particular. I thought he's had a really good couple of weeks here. But he's a scorer, a guy that can go get you a bucket. I don't think his defense is quite at the high level that you would like there, but he adds to what you're trying to do offensively. I'm not a super all about this potential deal. The reason his name and others in Nets continue to be floated are the Nets are primed for deals. They've already made a couple. They're clearly rebuilding, and so they're an obvious choice, much like Miles Turner was in the past of, well, we see what they're doing, so let's see if maybe this player is available.
You know what's funny, Scott? Tell me if you agree with this. If you were to rank the Pacers players in terms of their value, Miles Turner, what would you say is probably their 3rd or 4th most important player? 5th, somewhere in there? I mean, in no particular order.
I'd probably lean towards the latter just because of age and contract.
Yes, but I'm saying, like, right now, I mean – Halliburton, Nembhard, in no particular order. Halliburton, Nembhard, Siakam. Who am I missing? Maybe Nesmith would be
Mathurin.
in front of him. Okay.
I'd put Mathurin up there, especially the way he's been playing recently.
Yeah, that's fair. But if you were to rank the Pacer players in terms of their level of value outside of Indiana, he drops even further. Would you agree with that?
Who, Mathurin?
No, Miles Turner.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, I think he
totally
has a greater value to this roster in his style, and I think he's a great player for them. I mean, I'm a Miles Turner guy, but I think that what he brings to Indiana and the style that he plays is more custom fit here than it is. I don't think that he is necessarily a just automatically blend in wherever he goes guy because of his style.
Well, the good thing is he plays more of the modern game, right? He's not a back to the basket or play in the post, more traditional old school. He's a guy it can stretch out and does quite often from beyond the 3-point line. So that is good for, say, other teams. And maybe the elephant in the room here to consider in all this is the fact that the Pacers do have to spend the next 6 months figuring out their future at center because Miles is in a contract year. Isaiah Jackson's in a contract year coming off his rookie deal, but also an Achilles injury. James Wiseman's still under contract, but he's also coming off an Achilles injury. So as you look towards next year, Jake, that center spot's it's the biggest hole probably that they need to fill. The challenge is the 3 is the more coveted position.
I've pointed this out before, but those like in the summertime, some new restaurant opens or like a car wash or, a fundraiser, and they have those, I don't even know how to describe these. They're usually red, sometimes blue, but they're the like 30-foot high guy that has a fan on it, and so it's flapping in the wind, flying all over the place.
The wacky, wavy, arm-waving inflatable tube men. That's a Family Guy reference.
They always have the hair, like the kind of stranded hair. Those look like Miles Turner. Have you ever noticed that?
You mean in terms
He's
of their
joked about
defensive
that.
prowess? Yeah.
Certainly rookie Miles Turner. I think
Yeah,
he's
that's
changed
what I mean. When he
since
had
then, but
when his
no
hair
doubt.
was upright, right, as opposed to
Yep.
the way it is now. Really good guy, no question. And I think I would assume that they will make overtures to try to get him here. Question then becomes, whether they got to free up money, whether somebody like an Obi Toppin comes off the books to make it happen. But there's a lot of basketball between now and then. It's the Bulls that are at the Fieldhouse tomorrow night, then Golden State on Friday. Scott Agnes will have coverage of all of it at Fieldhouse Files. And we appreciate him joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Appreciate it, Scott.
All right, thanks, guys.
Scott Agnes joining us here on the program. All right, back into the Colts conversation as well as, again, Gus Bradley now out as defensive coordinator. Question is, what does that mean beyond the coaching staff? And by that, I mean, did they pigeonhole themselves? I'll explain what I mean next. Jimmy, I think it's time for us to have an uncomfortable conversation
Why this time?
because you're going to disagree with me on this.
Okay. Oh, you mean us directly? Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think I would have said that I'm alone on an island here, but I don't think so. There are certain things in life that you can very easily determine one's age bracket without even knowing them by simply asking them a question and gauging their answer. Okay?
Like a survey, perhaps?
Yeah, like if somebody said to me, like, hey, I need you to determine whether or not this person is over or under the age of blank, ask them this question. I believe that I have come up with one in relation to the Indiana Pacers.
Okay.
And then I'll get into my Colts thing here in just a second. Every year they come up with a different marketing campaign or slogan. I think the best one they had was Blue Collar Gold Swagger. I thought that was a really good one. The Colts have tried this as well. Some have worked better than others. For the Shoe was really popular. Colts Forged didn't seem to go anywhere. That seemed to kind of run into a brick wall. Yeah, that was one, wasn't it?
I think that is the current one still.
1-0, wasn't that one of them?
1% better.
Oh, keep chopping.
1-0, yeah.
The
Climb the mountain.
Yes, sirs is, I think, a line in the sand. I'm fully anticipating, and I can respect the fact that you guys probably enjoy yes, sirs. But I think most people of my age bracket, I can tell you, Shannon being one of them, was like, I don't understand this yes, sirs. I can't. And then we walk in the building, and she looks up, and it's like in a huge, and she's like, wait a minute. And I'm like, yeah, Shannon, that's like the official. Oh, really? But somebody just sent me a thing. I feel like it doesn't have staying power. I feel like we've rounded a corner where there are some people that are starting to turn on the yes, sirs thing.
So I would like to rationalize why I like it. I enjoy it because for years, kind of as an inside joke and like the excessiveness of, well, why do you shorten things that probably don't need to be shortened? Eddie and I think I can lump you in this. If you don't want to be a part of this, that's fine. I have other friends I've done this with.
You know, sometimes I don't like to be looped into things with you, Jimmy, but I think I will.
You're on this one? Welcome aboard.
Accept this one, this invitation.
I've been calling them the sirs for years.
Same.
You know, when I was in college, my buddy Marcus Walton called them the sirs. There was definitely, and again, at that time I was cool with it. It was hip, right? It was hip.
But I'm not sold on yes, sirs itself, and that I think it's a good campaign. I think it's hilarious because I thought it was something that just me and Eddie did, and now the Pacers are here turning it into a full-on brand
in college
campaign.
People saying that, like, yeah, are you going to go watch the sirs? That was kind of a thing for a brief time there.
JMV has pushed back against it to me as well. He thinks it sounds too, and he's the poster child for this, too, like Southern Hick Indiana-y. Like he's mocked it in that regard with the way yes, sirs is presented. I don't have a problem with it, but I get people being turned off by the idea of it feels forced. It doesn't feel natural to some extent.
Yes.
That said, I like it because I can't believe it's here and it's now a part of, like, whether it was a thing or not for people, it's now a part of mainstream Pacers lexicon by their choice. So I still appreciate it, but I get people feel like it's being forced.
I think I told you.
That's how I felt about the Rev It Up thing.
Which they got rid of after, what, 2 seasons?
Okay, here's another one, okay? All of the sports entities in the city are guilty of this. That at some point they try something, it's just like, we're trying too hard.
I blame Minnesota.
The Minnesota?
Skull.
The clap?
That's been around forever, though, hasn't it?
I know.
It started in Iceland, and then they stole it.
Okay. I know. For example, for the Colts we talked about, that touchdown monkey, that never really took off. They've had some that have worked, some haven't. The anvil thing, I think, is really weird. The revved up, I would agree with Eddie. It just kind of feels like, okay, really? Like they're bringing out this like half car thing, and it was kind of weird. Do you remember, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago because it was topical then. Do you remember the totally bizarre aspect of the dropping of an Indy car at midnight for New Year's?
I remember that, yeah.
And I, at the time, I remember saying they should have a car that is like permanently attached to the elevator shaft of Gainbridge Fieldhouse, if that's where they're going to do it, because it's down on Georgia Street. They had one hanging off a crane that was like 14 feet off the air.
Well, the good news is, with how much construction still going on in the city, your hard hat could double as a safety precaution
That's
for
true.
the event the car
That's
falls.
true. That's true. You could just do it down here on the steps,
Correct.
right? Which
Yes.
have been up for 7 years.
Yes.
But that one was the most disappointing to me of all. Was the IndyCar car thing was like, wait, what are we doing here? I think they gave that a 3-year effort.
Yeah.
And then they were like, okay. I think the last year they had it, literally, they didn't have it like, it was just hanging, and it was a windy night, and so the thing was like oscillating back and forth, and you thought there was the possibility that this $700,000 show car was going to fall and crash, but they didn't even know if it would have fallen, if it would have crashed, because it was only falling from 12 feet, because it was on like literally a scissor lift for a guy that was painting on the second story. I mean, it was very odd. All of it was odd.
Is this my window for my yearly plea to bring back Bowser from the farm upstate that he's at enjoying retirement? Like, is this where we're at now?
You like
thought he was
Bowser.
in
I would
Mario.
trade off yes sirs to bring Bowser back.
I thought he
would
was in
really-
Mario.
Who's the
nice.
So Boomer is the GOAT of mascots, right? In
Yeah.
Indy?
Yeah.
You know who's underrated? Nitro.
Okay.
Nitro's underrated.
I thought you were going to say Gapper.
I will also take a stand for Hink as
Wait,
well.
which one's
But
Gapper?
Wait.
Gapper's the Reds, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Rowdy?
Rowdy.
Rowdy's
thank you.
cool. I got no problem with Rowdy. Rowdy's cool. Slapshot was cool back in the old days. I think he was a cousin. He and Rowdy were roommates, I think. But Nitro's cool.
Yeah.
Nitro's very cool, very underrated. Kids love Nitro.
Have you gone up to the new complex to see a Fuel game yet?
I'm not.
I'm trying to get up there. I just haven't had
I know.
time.
I love going to Fuel games. Love
Let's
it.
go Fuel.
No, it's Let's Go Fuel. That
Yeah, I know.
rest his soul. That gentleman was great. By the way,
I forget his last name. First name was Scott.
Scott, yeah. The Fishers area up there, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Mhm.
Like we were up at King Jug not too long ago, and it was packed. And they're like, "Yeah, it's because the Fuel game's taking place." I'm, oh, that's right. All right, we will come back, and I will tell you my concern for the Colts with the Gus Bradley change and how it might impact some things that maybe we didn't even think about. We'll get into that next. Jimmy, oftentimes when a coordinator, and by the way, good afternoon to you, 2:00 hour here in Indianapolis. For that matter, let me try that again.
It's 2:00 on the entire Eastern.
Thank you.
Seaboard
For that
time
matter,
zone.
it's 2:00 everywhere in the Eastern time zone. Oftentimes when a coordinator, when you change from one to the next, typically you change all the way schematically different, right? You very rarely, and I'm sure people are probably screaming at their radio examples that are contrarian to what I'm talking about, but more often than not, when you go from coordinator A to coordinator B, you kind of go philosophically different.
Yeah, your scheme's
right?
going to change generally.
Right.
Unless you have a general manager that's, as you outlined, super controlling and wants a specific type of defense run with his players. But yeah, you're going to anticipate a philosophical shift.
On the opposite part, Jimmy, I mean, they go from Matt Eberflus to Gus Bradley, two very similar schemes, two very similar styles of coaching on the defensive side of things.
And so when you look at to that point, Eddie, you've now gone kind of back to back. I mean, the roster itself and the defense that you have is built towards what Gus Bradley likes to do, right? They didn't blitz a lot, right? I think you were primarily going with a defense that, as you could see, it goes without saying, that they really prioritized the defensive line and trying to get depth there.
That's where they wanted to win.
Pass rush.
That's where they wanted to win with the pass rush. They didn't want to have to do it with exotic blitz concepts. They wanted to win up front to make everything else easier for every other position group defensively, and it never came to pass.
That's a Ballard core belief right there.
And so that makes you wonder, does that limit, because of Ballard still being there and because of the philosophy of, look, we're not necessarily going to be like a junk style defense or one that shifts a lot, puts guys in different looks, moves them over. I mean, pretty much when you come up to the line, you got a pretty good idea of what you're looking at, right? And this group, whether it be Dio or whether it be Kwity Paye or whether it be, EJ Speed if he returns or, whatever players you're looking at, do you now have a cupboard that is full of spices that can really only kind of go into one kind of gumbo?
Well, and if it is, it's rather concerning unless they're able to make a big free agent acquisition or a big trade acquisition or whatever to turn the fortunes of the defense. Because if you look at what they did a year ago, and this is with primarily, a zone-based schematic look and winning up front in the trenches, they were down in quarterback pressures. They were down in sacks. They gave up the sixth most explosive plays in the National Football League, which is those plays of 20 yards or more. They were a mess in every category that you would hope the similar scheme outlook of Gus Bradley 2.0 or the next line of a Chris Ballard approved defensive coordinator would bring to the table. I've also argued, Jake, to your point, if you are in a let's play this season as it is, a do or die season for Chris Ballard and company, I don't think that you can leave any stone unturned in terms of having to change stance, hard line with where you've been. But I also asked that question yesterday, is he capable of those type of philosophical changes? Not just spending, but schematically out of what he wants in this defense? Or does he say to himself, I still believe in what I have out here. I'm going to go out guns a-blazing, true to myself and true to what I've done, and I'm not going to change anything drastically. It's going to be a status quo offseason. It's a very interesting tightrope for him to walk. I hope we get some clarity tomorrow morning at the press conference of, does he plan on changing any of his approach to this job in what could be a ninth and final season? And if the answer is no, that's part of the reason Colts fans are probably, maybe not most frustrated, but definitely annoyed.
I would expect his answer on that to be, look, I can't do my job effectively if I'm doing it under the assumption that this is the last year. Maybe, I mean, there should be a sense of urgency there for sure, right?
I think in a perfect world, though, for Colts fans especially, there's no way he doesn't know this is it. Like, you brought up the insanity definition. We use that all the time when it's a scenario of rinse, repeat, failure, rinse, repeat, failure. Why are things not changing? I don't know. Maybe we should look at the organizational foundation of this team. You're right. That's probably how he'll answer it. But human nature, even he, the ultimate survivor in executive front office work in the modern era of the NFL, even he has to see the writing on the wall that if you don't have a turnaround this year, it's probably it.
One of the things that I'm also curious about with Chris Ballard, it is remarkable how quickly, and I'm not saying people are wrong. I understand it. Fans are passionate. And I talked about yesterday, I went into my soliloquy about there's an expectation where fans that love the Colts just want to feel loved back, right? And I'm genuinely curious of this. Chris Ballard, for the vast majority, I would say 80% of his tenure, to my observation, has been extremely popular, almost envied, trusted. I think people trusted that he was doing the right thing. We heard repeatedly that he was how fortunate this market and this city and this franchise were to have him. He is very similar to me to Andrew Luck in this capacity. As I've mentioned before, when Andrew Luck came into the league and I was interviewing people, doing a radio show, interviewing people about that covered him at Stanford or that covered him for the Pac-12 network or whatever it might be, and I was saying, so look, I know this guy is the best prospect in the NFL to enter the league since Peyton Manning or John Elway, but what is it that makes him so great? And I've mentioned this 100 times before, but literally the answer everybody said was, oh, he's got an it factor, he's special. Well, what is it that makes him so special? Like, give me an example of something you see on the field and you say, see, that's what I'm talking about. Just a factor, like an it factor. But what is that it factor? Just being special. But nobody could, and I mean, obviously it was there, right? And I think with Luck, what we have learned is that what made him so unique and so special was he had a rare combination of ability to see on the field what needed to be done and then the physical attribute to deliver exactly on what it was that only he could see needed to be delivered. In the case of Chris Ballard, he reminds me a little of Andrew Luck in the fact that when he came into this job, Jim Irsay, everybody else, we heard routinely, he is highly coveted as a bright young star. Now, and I'm excited by that. Tell me what it is about it that gives people promise about him. He's just bright. What makes him bright? The fact he's a young star? No, I understand that, but when you talk about like what is the tangible evidence? Well, he's got it. And I don't mean any of this to disparage him. I'm just saying, like, it was almost like people around town, though, when you talk to people, they're like, listen, he is the next big thing. And because things have turned so quickly, and I know that wins and losses are the ultimate measuring stick, but I am curious if Chris Ballard if people would be more patient right now if he had a more engaging and open personality. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I mean, I don't know him well. I don't think he's a bad guy. I mean, I think he's been pretty honest. I appreciate that. He's been pretty transparent. He doesn't have, Bill Polian was when Bill Polian was in town, if you wanted to know where Bill Polian was, you walked out of your house and held a microphone up and he was there within 5 minutes, right? And so and Ryan Grigson was the antithesis of that. But maybe Ballard, like Stephen Holder mentioned, at times he kind of has an aura of I'm the smartest guy in the room. Does part of that fuel into why people have turned on him? It shouldn't. In his defense, it shouldn't. But I'm curious if that's a factor at all.
I think it could be a factor at this stage, but it's not the prevailing issue that Colts fans have. The prevailing issue that I think all Colts fans have, when you cut right down to the root of the problem, in the National Football League, you do not see front office executives go 8 years with no significant playoff wins outside of the game against Houston that they then go and they lose to Kansas City, with no real significant playoff wins, get that long of a lease on life before the light bulb clicks on and they realize a change in direction is necessary. The arrogance of it doesn't help. The over most confident guy, has all the answers mentality that he sometimes brings to the beginning of the season and after the draft and all of that, and the snide comments of, as you've highlighted before, Kevin Bowen's going to run me out of town or whatever the case may be. That all doesn't help.
Freaking Bowen,
exactly.
Man.
But
I need to get wide receivers.
But at the core of it, that just doesn't happen in the National Football League. You don't get that long of a lease on life without a organizational change, without significant substance of division titles or playoff success, which 99% of his time here, they've had neither.
I feel like there's a revisionist history with him, and I'll tell you why, and I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but like my friend Megan just texted me and said, yeah, but he used to be so much more visible, and now he's been MIA. I feel like his accessibility has pretty much been on par the entire time, but people really like him.
Talking about Ballard?
Yes.
He used to go on Colts Roundtable like quarterly, every 4 weeks, just to talk with Matt Taylor, and then it turned into at the halfway point of the season. Now he doesn't do it. He hasn't done it in like 3 years.
But I mean, in terms of, and I get that, like in within the organizational stuff.
His general
like
calendar is about the same.
Stepping outside of his comfort zone, his general accessibility has been about the same, right?
Yeah,
I don't think he owes that to us by any. He doesn't. Listen, I'm going to be very clear. I've said this before, and I hope people understand this. I don't think that Chris Ballard, Jim Irsay, Herb Simon, Rick Carlisle, Kevin Pritchard, Chad Buchanan, Mike Woodson, Matt Painter, Kurt Signetti, I don't think they owe us, the local media, anything, except for that, even though obviously now there are more platforms where this isn't always the case, we are still, by and large, the most widely spread conduit towards them being able to speak to their fan base. So that's what I've always said just about that. Like, I don't hold any ill will. The one thing that I've always said about this job, and where I look at a guy like Chris Ballard, and I totally understand why Ballard would occasionally snaps back, is our job by and large is to do nothing for 3 hours a day but critique the performance and the job effectiveness of other people. So it's only fair if when we ask a question they don't like, that they snap back with the same. Look, you're going to sit here and come into this room and ask me 15 different ways that I've fallen short at my job. I think the question you just asked me fell short. I think that's actually, that doesn't always make it fun, but it's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair, but also you get more leeway on that when you have success. You get more of a shield of carte blanche to be like, no, I'm not taking that question, or I'm not going to deal with that, when you have success to back it up. I know I'm reiterating the point, but you just don't have this level of stuck in the mud philosophy around well-run organizations and not have change arrive. That's what Colts fans are most upset about, because what's happening here in Miami are the only two active markets where you have a GM that's in year 7 or 8 with the franchise, and there's been no real substance or growth. Miami, it's been a different table because of all the weapons they have. Here, it's the same thing, and everybody's wondering, why is there not a new face in town?
239-1070 is the telephone number. Dave has called in to join the program. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hi, Jake. Getting this juice out of life, my friend.
That's what I like to hear. How are the roads, Dave? Sounds like you're driving. Everything okay?
They're not bad. It's car rider line, brother. They're all back in school today picking up the grandkids. So,
all right, fair enough. Or kids, yeah.
Yeah. So here's what I think. And you guys made a great point. 8 years, 4 winning seasons. 2 of them were 9-8, made the playoffs twice. Anybody else would have been done. I don't care about Ballard so much as this. I think Jim Irsay and the Indianapolis Colts are missing a wonderful opportunity to change the complete format of this franchise, similar to what they did at Indiana in college and similar to what they did in Detroit in 2021. And they're missing the opportunity because Gus Bradley didn't get fired. They didn't renew his contract. You got a quarterback that might be in his 3rd year who now has a back injury that nobody seemed to know anything about, and his college coach said he couldn't believe they made him a captain. You got a bunch of players that we've heard may be on the trading block for the last 3 years. This was the perfect opportunity for Jim Irsay to replace the GM, maybe the coach, the coaching staff, and a whole format of players that we're hearing stuff out of the locker room that doesn't bode well for the attitude of the people that we're paying to go see play.
Yeah, and Dave, here's the thing, and I love all the points you made. I mean, not surprising coming from you that you got it nailed down, right? Because you know your stuff. I know that. I'll put it to you this way, Dave. When's the last time, I mean, aside from getting on one of the apps and putting down a little wager for fun here or there, you know, when is the last time that you thought about or heard about or saw a game of the New Orleans Saints? They're just kind of there, right? They're just kind of there. They're like the Long John Silvers of NFL teams. Like, yeah, I mean, I know they're there, but I can't remember the last time I went. You know, that kind of thing, right? And I like Long John Silvers, by the way. But I think Jim Irsay would be stunned to find out that for sports talk radio stations in Boise, Idaho, and Flagstaff, Arizona, and Macon, Georgia, and Bethesda, Maryland, the Indianapolis Colts are the New Orleans Saints. They have spiraled their way into relative obscurity and anonymity within the National Football League and its fan base outside of the state of Indiana and its core fan base. And because I think that Jim Irsay, and I understand this, I can relate to it, actually. I think Jim Irsay still does think, though, that they're within a whisker of the Peyton Manning era. And as I mentioned earlier, the one irony of that is the one decision that Jim Irsay truly has made in the last decade and a half that was rooted in football business as opposed to emotion and sentimentality was cutting Peyton Manning. That's it. The rest of it now, I think a lot of the decisions he's made, the decision to retain Grigson and Pagano and attach him at the hip, and then, you know, probably to a great extent, the belief longer than most people in Chris Ballard and the direction of it, and the Anthony Richardson hope and a prayer that this guy is going to pan out. I think a lot of it is rooted in Jim Irsay, who is a really, really, and I can appreciate it, a sentimental, kind-hearted at his core person. I think most of the decisions he has been making have been based on sentimentality and emotion as opposed to sitting down and making the most shrewd business decision. And the Peyton Manning decision was the one that he made that seemingly was offered as there was no other alternative. So therefore, we are releasing Peyton Manning. And say what you want, it may well be the case that 130 years from now, kids are sitting around and they're talking about the age-old adage of the day that the Boston Red Sox decided to trade Babe Ruth and how it haunted them for 70 years. Maybe that is the case. Maybe Peyton Manning is the ghost of Christmas past, and the release of him and the fact that now he's on the sidelines watching the Denver Broncos and watching Bo Nix get the Broncos into the playoffs, and he is doing the Manning cast from Denver, and his kid is playing for, you know, Cherry Creek soon to be instead of playing for Park Tudor. Maybe those things are all the way that the football gods had it laid out. But ironically enough, and it was the right decision at the time, I totally understood it. I totally backed it. In terms of from a football business sense, with Andrew Luck waiting in the wings, it was the right decision. But unfortunately, circumstantially since then, other decisions that have been made to follow those through have been made with heartstrings instead of football mind. And so it's made it full circle back to the point where you go back to it and go, that was the last smart business football decision that was made.
That's all very bizarre to me, though, because if you were going to cut right at the key valve of those sentiment heartstrings and those memories of letting go of Peyton Manning, why would you still have a longing for sentiment associated with Chris Ballard? Because he's not tied to those memories.
Well, because Jimmy, what I'm saying is this. Excellent question. I think the reason that this is the best way to say it. I'm going to go with a bad analogy here. I know that's shocking.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have the bad analogy sounder by any chance, Eddie? We have a sounder that we play every once in a while when I come up with a query.
Did it make it through the New Year's Eve party?
That's a good question. When music is a prime example, okay? The older that you get, you hear a song and you think it is current, or you think a band is current. And then you come to realize you're like, wait a minute, like that was like 30 years ago. Like I saw the other day one of those Facebook posts, and it was a VHS tape that a kid had made in 1999 on the last day of school, and he's asking people, he's like, so who's your favorite band? And I'm watching this video, and it's on a grainy VHS film. Like I can tell by looking at the video, it's old, right?
Yeah.
And the kids are like, oh, Third Eye Blind. And I'm like, wait a minute, like Third Eye Blind's not that old, right? And then I'm like, wait, they are. That was 25 years ago. But because of my age, it doesn't feel like long ago to me until I get the outside the vacuum reminder. And what I'm saying is about Peyton Manning and why Irsay, that allows him the sentimentality of believing in Chris Ballard and giving it more rope, is because Jim Irsay, I don't think, realizes that the Peyton Manning era was, in fact, that long ago. So he thinks that they are still right within the grasp, and it's within their hands that they are seen as this championship-level winning culture, top of the line, upper quartile of upper quartiles franchises. And in reality, that in NFL terms was 3 lifetimes ago.
And I'm not sure, it doesn't help either that Dallas Clark, Peyton Manning, Edgerrin James, Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison Jr., all these guys are going into the Ring of Honor. They're going into the Hall of Fame.
Marvin Harrison Sr., but yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why I said junior, but all these guys are going into the Hall of Fame, Ring of Honor, whatever, and now all of these memories are coming back to the surface.
That's exactly correct.
So
now
you
it's
feel
like it's a current era.
That was yesterday.
I mean, I do still think of that when I think of the Colts, I think exactly that. Manning, Harrison, Wayne, Freeney, and I'm like, that was a lifetime ago. What really becomes hard is this, and now we're really on a query sleep deprivation thing here. But
I'm sorry.
if you go back, no, it's fair. I'm hesitant to say this because it is such a horrific moment in history. But 9/11, and please accept my apology for bringing up, something like that has no comparison in the world of sports in real life. I get it. But 9/11 was such a watershed moment, historically speaking, in this country for so many reasons. But one of them, culturally speaking, is this. It is the first significant event to take place in the world where the vast majority of it was recorded and documented on digital capture. And so as a result of that, when you go back on 9/11 each year on the History Channel and you watch those documentaries and you see all of the home videos and the video that you saw, and the news footage of it, there's no deterioration of the quality of the look. So it feels like, other than the eyeglass shapes and some of the fashion, when you're watching it, you're like, this feels like it could have been yesterday, because the sky is just as blue as it was that day. The grass is just as green, all of it. There's no deterioration of it. And oftentimes when you go back and you look at certain things in history, it is simply the fact that you go, oh, well, that was on a VHS tape, or that was on a 3/4-inch tape, or whatever it was. That's the reminder to you that is, in fact, dated and aging. And I think that when it comes to sports, it's usually the tenure and the ebb and flow of a franchise that reminds you how long ago something was. Like, to think about the fact that the Chicago Bulls were the most relevant team in the National Basketball Association feels forever ago now, because it's been so long since that's been the case. But the Colts had that run, and then because they kind of don't let go of it, and they're constantly bringing back those guys and honoring them and whatever else, then it does seem and feel like the owner is unaware of how distanced that is and how the fan base has run out of the patience of trying to recapture it, because much of the fan base doesn't see it as anything other than the only thing keeping it timeless to them is the fact that it's on digital film. That's it.
Well, that's an incredibly deep problem for the Colts if that is the case, because ultimately, come hell or high water in this regard, Jim Irsay is the head honcho, as we all know, and the decision maker there. If that is the case of being so marred in the past that you can't see, you don't have to bring up the Saints, Jake. You can look at it a different way. For years, and I've seen this analogy used a couple times in different print about where the Colts are right now. For years, they ran circles around this division. They are far closer to the bottom of the South than they are anything else in the American Football Conference. They just are. Like that is what they're more synonymous for your market in Idaho or Topeka or wherever is,
Right.
oh, yeah, the South's a laugher. And look down there, it's Jacksonville and Tennessee and Indianapolis.
It feels like the NFC South, does it
Yeah,
not? I mean, like how often do we talk about the race between the Bucks, Saints, Panthers, and who's the last one I'm missing here? Falcons. Ugh, right? That's the AFC South. I mean, to the rest of the NFL, it's like, oh, yeah, I completely forgot about that division.
It's kind of been that way for the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe the Texans are finally the team to take the mantle and push forward, but who knows?
But here's the thing. Each year when the division has to send somebody into the playoffs, they're like, here's our sacrificial lamb. We're sending this poor young lamb to go up against into the lion pit with the Bills and the Chiefs, right?
Yeah, they don't belong. You can always one of these things does not look like the other. It's always the South.
Here's one thing I know. One thing I know is that Eddie clearly lost the bad analogy sounder because we just threw out about 5 that were terrible where it would have been completely appropriate to play. when you were in, I can't recall this. When you were in England, you did or did not rent and drive a car?
Did not. Went public transit.
Okay.
Big public transit fan, especially in big cities like that.
So I believe I told you that, okay, the Australians, Michael, Marcus,
Yeah.
Daniela, you've met them, Luke.
Are they coming in while I'm out Thursday and Friday?
They arrive in, well, so here's the thing.
Also, they're bringing Tim Tams. It's very important.
Tentative on both, so let me explain.
All right.
The very first time when I met the Australians, it was because we were at a Pacer game. Shannon said, the guy behind us has an accent. I said, where are you from? He said, Australia.
Just was it that flippant, or was there more?
She just said,
Jake, do you hear these people behind
yeah,
us?
I mean, like, we're not like xenophobic, right?
Yeah,
One of us
the
gets
way
his
the
accent.
way that was presented could have easily been Jake. Oh.
No, she just I think she said, like, do you
We
think
get an usher?
the guy behind us, like, do you think he's from Australia or England? Like, where do you think his accent's from? That kind of thing. So I turned around, of course, and I said,
Sure.
hey, you got an accent, man. Where are you from? And he said, Melbourne, Australia. I said, okay. And I thought he must have worked for Lily or something. And then I found out he was just a fan who came all the way from Australia to the game. And so I said, well, do you want a tour of Indianapolis? This is a service I provide. And I said, here's my number if you want somebody to show you around while you're in town. And I didn't hear from him, didn't expect to ever again. And then he called and he said, you know what? I think I would like to have somebody show us around, and here's why. Because I hired a car, which apparently in Australia you don't rent a car, you hire a car, okay? He said, I hired a car, and I said, you mean you rented a car? Yes, I rented a car, okay. And he said, but I wasn't comfortable driving here. And I remember thinking, like, this guy, are you kidding me? Like, what are you, 12? And I kind of laughed about it. It was in January, so it was cold outside. I now totally get it, because when I went to Ireland and rented a car or hired a car, I had to then drive the way they're used to, which is not only driving on the left side of the road, but also from the right side of the car. It is the weirdest thing ever. It completely throws you off. You have no clue what you're doing. So he messaged me yesterday and said, because they land tomorrow before the game against the Bulls, and they're staying downtown, and he said, I have hired a car again, but I'm worried about driving in the snow and ice. Now, I feel, and when I become mayor of Indianapolis, this is not going to be an issue, but I do feel somewhat like guilty over the fact that here we got this guy that has never even like been, other than when he's been to Indianapolis, has never seen it, below 40 degrees outside, and we're expecting him to drive in this. So, Eddie, I don't know that he's going to be coming in studio because, number one, I don't know if he'll be able to get here.
Well, if he's staying downtown, he could be in walking distance, Jake,
But then that's the other issue. You think he's ever walked on ice? I mean, let alone, have you seen Monument Circle, what they've done to the steps out here?
That's true.
It's like a hot LZ out here, right? So, I don't know.
So, are you saying that you are not going to offer up your services to go get him in your
Uncle Jake's taxi.
military-grade Uncle Jake's taxi?
Here's the other thing, though. My car is currently, and now I'm told it's going to be a 5-day job.
Uh-oh.
Well, the heater fan went out. Bad time for that,
Brutal.
right?
Yeah.
But to get to that, you got to take the entire dashboard and 3 tires off before you can get to it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. It's kind of like my email in here. It's like trying to get into my email, right? You got to take everything apart.
The whole
you got
computer.
my email. I'm locked out of my email here, and yet, which is fine. I get it. We had to change our passwords, and I changed my password. But in order to reset my password, it has to send me a link to my email to reset my password. But I'm locked out of my email. I don't know what's
Who's
going
on first?
Here.
What's on second?
That's exactly how it feels. That is exactly how it feels. But
Well,
anyway,
I will. I hope that the weather doesn't totally ruin their trip, even if they're not going to be, as you mentioned, buying a car, or what do you say? What did you phrase it as?
hiring a car.
Hiring a car. Yeah.
Hiring a car.
Yeah. That's a fun phrase. I love the little nuance differences within.
They also put a U in everything. Like,
They put you in everything.
well, I mean, who wouldn't love that?
Yeah.
But they put the letter U in everything.
Jeez,
Like, the word
really,
humor
Jimmy?
is HUMOUR.
Really?
Like, I'm
Really?
going to write you a check is CHEQUE. You're in queue for everything. You're not in line, you're in queue. Very strange.
Have you talked to them about their overall thoughts on the state of the Pacers? Do they
Oh,
feel
Michael?
excited about the 9-12?
I get, believe you me, Michael the Australian. He watches every game, every basket, every game. He lives and dies with every shot. So yes, if they get down 7, I'm going for a walk. I can't take this anymore. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course you're going for a walk. It's 72 and sunny outside. You ain't gonna be going for a walk around here if it doesn't go well, right? It's sub-zero.
It's a sad walk if you are.
Yeah, it's a long walk, right? Do you have plays of the day? By the way,
I got a couple for you.
All right, we'll do that next.
Today's plays of the day, mix of college basketball and the NBA. Both college bets in the SEC will start first. Tennessee travels to Florida to take on the Gators in a battle of two top 10 teams. I'll take the Gators to get back to winning ways and knock off number 1 Tennessee tonight. In Gainesville, Kentucky on the road against Georgia. Give me the Wildcats and Big Blue Nation to win on the money line over the Bulldogs. Last one for you in the NBA. The Suns and Hornets do battle tonight in Charlotte. Not going after the spread, but do like the total in Suns games. The unders occurred in 9 of their last 10. Same with the Hornets, but it's been 8 of their last 9. Total's 225. I'll go under 225 total points in Suns-Hornets matchup. This evening, all those games tipping off right around 7 o'clock. Eddie, any plays for you?
No plays for me, but it is, Jimmy, a Sega Baba for the Phoenix Suns.
Ooh, that's noteworthy.
And then additionally, as been acknowledged by Jake, I would just like to thank everybody for believing in Watermelon Gummies for getting, and thank you for the support on the championship and the Grand
Congratulations,
Company.
Eddie, I saw this, and I'll give you this much, and I'm going to sound like sour grapes guy here. Okay?
You are.
Hold on. I will give you full credit because if you look at the scoreboard over the championship round, regardless of who you played, you would have beaten anybody in the league.
I appreciate that.
Matthew and Maine did confess to the fact that Matthew did not know it was a 2-week, and I understand how that would happen. Didn't know it was there was a second week to it and didn't reset the roster. I do think that it is entirely possible. Matter of fact, I'll go so far as to say it is not only entirely possible, but factual, Eddie, that you and I are the only 2 people in our fantasy league that were still updating rosters and paying attention this past week.
Well, that's because I was in the championship. Jake.
Well,
I know, but like everybody else thought it was over like 3 weeks ago.
And generally
I was up
speaking,
80 on Matthew after the first week, so it was a very steep hill to climb.
generally speaking, unless you have like prize money or something on the line past the consolation bracket, people stop setting the lineup once you get into the consolation rounds because it's a moot point at that point.
Well, I was down 80-something after week 1, and then I had to go in and bench Josh Allen and bench all these people because they weren't going to play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I picked up Geno Smith as my quarterback. I ended up losing by like 1.1 points.
In a lot of leagues that I do, we ban teams from picking up and dropping players once they're officially out of the winner's bracket because you're no longer in the contention for money, and there could be a piece that the championship team matchup wants to go pick up. So generally we ban people from making roster acquisitions once the season is done for you.
The regular season.
Right. Once the playoffs are done, like once you're out and you're in the consolation ladder, unless there's still prizes to be played for in the consolation ladder or the toilet bowl, we generally say, hey, you can still change your lineup, but you can't add and drop players anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. Because, I mean, what would have stopped me, Jimmy, from
That's why we do it.
for saying, like, hey, do me a favor. Drop.
Correct. Or what if you get in cahoots with Eddie and say, hey, I'm going to drop all of my good players, and you go,
Eddie, that's
yeah,
what
I
Eddie
understand.
did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Eddie, here's the thing. Eddie actually was the one that could control the transactions, and he had all these transactions down the stretch.
Is this tinfoil hat worthy?
No,
Oh, okay.
not at all.
All right.
My starting receivers were on Matthew's team from earlier in the season.
Actually, my star receiver I got from Matthew for a trade at the beginning of the year, and Matthew made it further than I did, so kudos to him. J&V is here. Let me move all the stuff out of your chair here, John. I got my bag. I got the jacket. Big show lined up?
Big show lined up today. You guys have a big show today?
We did. We talked, obviously the Gus Bradley news. One of the things that I'm curious about, and Jimmy made this point, it's a really good one. If there's question about John.
Lame duck status?
What's that?
Lame duck coaches?
Correct. So if you're a D coordinator, if you're a top D coordinator candidate,
yeah.
And by the way, I love that you're wearing a PBR shirt.
Thanks, buddy. Just for you.
If you are a candidate for the defensive coordinator position, are you going to want to go to a place where you look at it and you go, there's a chance their coach could be out in a year or two, and which is the
not
case,
unless you're desperate, don't have any other options.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So have they pigeonholed themselves now into getting kind of bottom of the, fantasy football like watermelon gummy level players? You know what I mean?
I said this yesterday. I was wrong. I thought 2022 was a clown show, but in hindsight, now it's not. You go back, and that's being proactive about something that wasn't getting it done and issues you had in 2022 in the locker room. You made the wrong choices in how you approached it or addressed it but at least you addressed it, and you're not just kicking the can down the road as they're doing right now. The only way that I can even be fond of anything right now, they so are in need of a president of football operations, an overseer of overseers here, because it's not Jim. Where they're going right now, it has just developed into being one of those doormats of the NFL.
Are you saying they need somebody to
Bengals.
oversee even Ballard?
Yes,
Is that what you're saying?
Oversee the over. Well, clearly, Buckner yesterday talked about egos holding back in the lot. Who the hell should have a big enough ego with that mess,
John,
to hold anything
I
back?
pointed this out earlier. DeForest Buckner's the only one that could. DeForest Buckner's the only on that if you look at the marquee players, at the marquee players on this roster: Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., Anthony Richardson, Quentin Nelson, Zaire Franklin, on and on and on. DeForest Buckner's the only one of them that has been within breath of championship level, right? He's been on great teams. The rest of these guys have been on fighting and scratching and clawing for 500 teams, right?
If you're Jim Irsay and you were made aware or heard that you had egos in your locker room, this is all stuff that goes back to 2022. That's the reason why he brought Jeff Saturday in. Jeff Saturday was the mole.
Well,
time.
Jeff Saturday was there to itemize,
and
right?
They had similar issues going on. Philip Lindsay will tell you, the guy in Denver who was here for that season will tell you about the issues they had going on in the locker room. And I always reference that as a clown show, but it isn't. It is somebody being proactive, like they're proactive in Tennessee today. All right, we're going in a new direction. We got a number 1 overall pick. I'm assuming that Rand Carthon probably wasn't a fan of the quarterback.
Right. What do you get, 2 years there, Rand Carthon?
Yeah, 2 years, and you're done. You realize you look in the mirror, and what you see, you have to be honest about.
Here's the other
thing. And then you
thing.
make a change. You don't kick the can down the road.
The other thing, too, when you look at that, and you're talking about the 2022 clown show and then this one, and DeForest Buckner calling out guys, I'm not trying to kick a guy when he's down in the form of Chris Ballard, John, but he has been one that has kind of preached that so long as you have leadership amongst your veteran players, you can take some character risks because the culture will set the tone that overrides that for everybody else. That clearly hasn't been the case.
What of his core values have been the case?
I mean, they've had guys that are getting suspended late in the year because they're stealing out of other guys' lockers. I mean, come on, man.
What,
you know what I mean?
What of the core values and his beliefs and his so-called process? This is just being honest. There's nothing personal, right? I want it to work. You want it to work because we're sick and tired of talking about it in this fashion.
Of course.
But what has he done in this operation that's worked? I asked yesterday, too, where's the hope here? Where's the hope in doing with this entire operation what you did this past year, with the exception of what everybody could have done and seen, and it was easy to do because his contract ended, is move on from Gus Bradley? Where is the hope? There's zero hope. And Jimmy brought this up a little bit earlier today. It all rides on a quarterback that has not proven 1 ounce he can play that position at that level.
Yeah, that's the only, and this isn't a good flip side of the pillow analogy, but it's just the reality of the Colts situation, Jake. It almost doesn't matter how much they've pigeonholed themselves for what defensive coordinator they can get. The only thing that matters for their lifeline now is that lottery ticket of a quarterback winds up panning out to something.
He's a running back.
Yeah, he's a tight end.
Rick Venturi called him a running back last night. Rick Venturi and I talked about that on Sunday up in the booth. He is a running back until further notice because he is more of a running back than a quarterback.
Tim Tebow got a shot at tight end before they finally threw in the towel, right? John's up next. We will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks to Stephen Holder, Scott Agnes, and thanks to you for listening to Query & Company.